Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Riverdale. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, obviously, it's the first day of everyone, teaching their respective classes. It was kind of interesting. Obviously, Betty's kind of out of anyone kind of got the rougher end of the day. Well, her and Jughead kind of got some issues because, well, for one, the first thing is like, oh, anyone's got any questions if we take apart this car? Yeah, your dad was Black Hood, right? It's like, yep, and he taught me everything about taking apart cars. Anyone have any relevant questions? Is like, of course that's going to come up. I mean, you're going to be infamous in town, and it's especially in a small town like Riverdale when there's been a whole bunch of murders and your dad was one of said serial killers. You're going to gain a lot of attention. But also, Jughead's catching a lot of flack because, hey, you're a writer and stuff like that, especially when they find out, like, when some of his students are like, whoa, you also work at Pops too? It's like, yes, I do. Like, and to be honest, he's like, hey, working at this school doesn't give me a livable wage. It's like, yeah, but aren't you a big-time writer? Yeah, the only writing I want to talk about is Of Mice and Men. Who read it? No one? All right, pop quiz. I love how, like, he's not like this ain't one of those stories where it's like, those movies like Dead Poet Society or those things of like, oh, the teacher disinspired. He's just so like, honestly, I'm doing this because honestly it's another paycheck, but he's not like inspiring. But I think, to be fair, he's lost a little bit of that flair just because it's like, well, he's in debt to people and just like rushing to write his next book because he kind of has to because of the advance they gave him. So I think it feels like Jughead's lost a little bit of that passion, but it's almost just kind of like, you guys don't care, you young whippersnappers don't care, which is funny because, once again, it's not like he was, but I guess because he's always been passionate about reading and writing, but it's like their dispassion and just his current circumstances, I think, just make him dispassionate about it. But I'm curious to see if they end up kind of turning that around in his particular case of being like, oh, he gets him actually excited about reading, and maybe that obviously, like him getting back to writing, maybe that'll help, inspire him to inspire his students. Maybe we'll kind of get a little bit of that, Dead Poet Society type of feel and vibe to it. So, I don't know, I'm curious to see on that front. But continuing on the Jughead front, it is actually really interesting. Obviously, Tabitha's giving, like, we find out some interesting stuff about Tabitha. Like, she was actually kind of like fancy CEO like position jobs is kind of in the direction she was going, but she decided to come back and work at Pops, but for her it's like, I can take a lot of the skills I learned and apply them and kind of franchise Pops out. She's like, I'm even the one that's suggesting, like, putting the gas pump out front, that way, like, when the truck drivers come by at night, they can pump gas. So, like, finding new ways to kind of bring in new revenue for Pops. And I thought that was, showing, that was kind of interesting. Knowing, and once again, that's a whole conversation about taking your skills and coming back to your hometown and kind of implying and kind of pumping new life and new money into your town. That's kind of like the whole thing. What was I watching recently? Where, because interestingly enough, that's an element in the new show Superman and Lois. Like, Clark a lot of people in Smallville hadn't really done that, so it's just interesting, that the parallels in that particular case. But she also set Jughead up to meet with this dude, what was it, Dreyfus, about Mothman. I'm like, what the hell? I was wondering, is that supposed to be like the new Gargoyle King? Apparently not. It's kind of the old Gargoyle King in the sense that it turns out that Mothmen are kind of, I guess that's how the aliens look. But basically the dude's like, 30 years ago, some people went missing, usually one at a time, going up to a spaceship. And it's like, oh, living out here alone, aren't you worried that they're going to come after? He's like, no, I'm hoping so. Like, he's like, oh, they got taken on a spaceship. He's like, I kind of want to too. It's like, that's actually kind of sad that it's like you're waiting to be abducted, because he's saying like aliens, Mothman, whatever you want to call them. But even Jughead's like, I've lived Riverdale my entire life. Like, why am I only hearing about this now? It's like, there were some articles and stuff like that, but I guess alien-related stuff up. But it's like, it's Riverdale. Riverdale's been the hotbed of weird and crazy. It's like, you think you'd heard something about aliens until now. I guess it's going to be one of those. I'm curious, is it going to have anything connected to the truck driver, like, mystery at all? Or is it just going to be kind of its own separate thing? I'm curious to see where that goes. Especially because Jughead was looking into it, and he found out all the other people, like, that Dreyfus had given him, like, names of. It's like, oh, they're all dead. yeah, they all died of cancer, which could be a coincidence, but it's like, oh, would you get cancer on a spaceship? He's like, I don't know, but basically a good story. But I think that might be, because also, once again, they were taken one at a time. The next one was taken when the previous one was returned. So part of me was wondering, like maybe this is like a kidnapping ring type of situation. Maybe it had something to do with the truck driving. Like I said, maybe it's just interesting because it seems like we're dealing with some kidnapping storylines, and it's just like potentially something very, very old in Riverdale being related to that. Now it's happening again. Maybe very much like the Black Hood situation, because it was a similar circumstances of like Betty's dad's dad went down that route, and so it's like he went down that route, so it's like Betty was kind of positioned to go down that route as well. So I'm curious, like, are we dealing with multiple generation of kidnappers? Maybe they were experimenting on people, so maybe it's not necessarily Mothman, maybe it's just like some doctors or whatever kidnapping people and experimenting on whatever the case may be. They're exposed to certain materials that gave them cancer. Maybe that's what that's hinting towards. Maybe not. I could easily be reading too much into it. But what I also thought was an interesting byproduct of it, it's like, no, oh, you want to look into this stuff? It's like, yeah, not unless you're like the lone wolf type. And he's like, oh, no, sure. And I'm like, okay. Because I had a feeling for the beginning, I was like, especially because under the circumstances they met of like how they kind of butted heads, she was like, "Nah, I'm not. You're not gonna just sit here and order coffee. You're gonna order something else. Fine, I'll give you a job." Like her reluctancy towards Jughead a lot of times, I'm like, oh, I'd hit that off. Like I was like, oh, getting hints of that early on. I was like, is there gonna be something there? And I think so. This might be kind of like the new Bughead. Like, that might be what they're kind of setting up, especially because obviously a lot of relationships and dynamics have changed. First of all, let's move on to Veronica's story. Because obviously Chad shows up. Because Veronica, she was planning on taking, I think, that video store, which, good thing she wants to try and take that. And I mean, I guess it's like any place you go to has history, but to know, like, what that place was, like, oh, the terrible, like, sex tapes and fucking snuff videos that used to be in it. I think that's that blue, that Velvet Rose place or whatever, right? I think that's the place she's planning on, like, turning into a jewelry store. I believe that's the same place. It could be a different place, but, because I think she had talked about, yeah, this place used to kind of have some bad stuff, but it's like, oh, rebranding and stuff like that. I'm still like, it's, like I said, any place probably has some terrible history associated. I mean, that doesn't just apply to places, it applies to the entire countries, in actuality, but regardless. But Chadwick just kind of showing up and just being like, oh, hey, nah, you go ahead and teach. I'll be in the back of the class. I'm like, I don't like you, dude. It's just he comes off a little too like, oh, like I kind of have to be the center of attention. Like, oh, like I want everyone to see how much I love you and stuff like that. But then he, when they're singing at first, I was like, okay, she's going up. But then I was like, oh, you're trying to steal the spotlight. But then like they're doing their thing. Because at first when Archie and him meet, I'm like, a little animosity because it's like husband meet ex-boyfriend. Granted, that was 7 years ago, but still, it looked like there was a little animosity. But Archie seemed like he was happy for them because he was smiling, like, hey, Veronica and him. It's almost like hey, they're in love. And I think it's also the thing of like, it's probably like, hey, let's not forget earlier him and Betty were shacking up in that car in the God, what's it? The mechanic class. So I thought that was interesting. But regardless, it seemed like Archie was like happy for him and everything, and it seemed like Chadwick I was like, oh, maybe you're not the dick I thought you were, because it seemed seemed so accommodating. I was like, okay, maybe he's kind of changed things around. And even Veronica was like, oh, that's good. And he's like, hey, like maybe I'll stick around in Riverdale a couple of days. She's like, yeah, I like that, because she wanted to get space from him, but now it seemed like, oh, like he's becoming a lot more accommodating. He seems like I was like, okay, maybe Chadwick's not as bad as. And it's like, no, of course it won't last, because when Archie came asking like, oh, maybe I could get you guys get some money from you guys. It's like, oh, you mean. And he was like, yeah, I'll pay you back, Veronica. You mean pay us back? He's like, right, I'll pay you guys back. And he's like, no, Archie isn't the type who likes a handout, which is true. Archie would probably be like, oh, I can, whatever you need me to do for you. But like him trying to minimalize Archie to be like, hey, maybe you could work on fixing our place up. It's like, it was like he could have found any other means of asking Archie to help out or whatever. It's like, oh, you can do this for me, but it's like he picked work that he probably deemed demeaning because he wanted to feel big in front of Archie. And I think even Veronica was like, why do you have to be such a dick to him? It's like, well, no, I offered him work and stuff. It's like, yeah, but you were still you didn't have to be a dick about it, because it was like, like I said, in his mind, it was kind of demeaning work. Like, I feel like he could have found some other work that he was like, oh yeah, do this, because I know you seem like the type of dude that would never want to, so. Because obviously it's definitely not the same parallels that like Archie had with like Katie's boyfriend like a couple episodes back. It's definitely not, because they had some like kinship a little bit. It's definitely not the same dynamic at all. But in his but for Veronica, it was just kind of like a whoa, and then especially because they were planning out like, hey, like, he plans on like coming to Riverdale, like helping her out with the business and stuff like that, because she even showed it, because she was like, this is be good for my son. And she's like, I need your support and love. He's like, you got it. So it's like I said, it seemed like he was, oh, maybe you're not as bad as I thought, but it's like, no, he was putting up this front because he was like, I even was nice to your friends, I even did karaoke. She was like, I didn't realize that was a chore. He's like, it's not. It's like, yes, it was. He just wanted to put on a bigger front because he knew he was losing you, and he figured he could rein you back in, which I do mean that specific kind of rein you back in by being like, well, she won't get too far away if I show that I'm good with her friends. Like, he's using this as an excuse to keep a tighter leash on her to a certain extent. And he's so demanding. He seems too damn controlling. Like, oh, things have to be my way. Because even Veronica's like, oh, you want to go to Pops? And he was like, and another greasy burger and onion rings? Ugh, no. Maybe go to Mia's. It's just, for one, you picked a place that her father suggests, which she has a very complicated relationship with her dad. Like, that just seems like stirring the pot, Because even he was suggesting him, like, working with her dad, and it's like, wait, you've been talking to my dad behind my back? Like, once again, it's like, that common sense would tell you not to get in bed with the man she really has super complicated feelings with, but it's also like it shows a disregard for her own feelings. It's just like, I don't care how you feel, like, this is an opportunity, I mean, maybe in his own deluded way he thinks like, oh, like, I'm helping bridge the gap between you and your dad. It doesn't seem like that's his reasoning. It just seemed like I'm doing this for me type of thing, but But in that moment, him suggesting Mia's made her kind of go, huh? Because regardless of anything, Pops is important to her. And it's like, that's why I feel like he's missing. Like, you're not realizing what's important to her. You're just focusing on what's important to you. And even her at the end of the day was like, hey, I think we do need, I was planning on kind of pulling away because I think we needed time to ourselves. And these past few days have been great, but I still think we need time to ourselves. And for her, it's like, if I'm a Pops or Mia girl, because I think she's trying to decide. Well, I think that's kind of, obviously it's kind of meant to be like a metaphor of like what I want out of my life, because it's like what you want out of life isn't necessarily what I want. Maybe I am a Pops girl, where it's like, just because Pops, might be this greasy, like, it's not as like probably like high class as like Mia's or whatever. It's like, so that's the kind of life you want. So like, maybe I can, I toe that line between what I want and out of life, because Veronica's never really used her family position to really lord it over people. She's always she's always been a very down to earth type of person. I mean, She actually talked about it early in Riverdale, how like she used to not be, but being in Riverdale. So I think that's for her. It's like, am I going to backpedal a little bit into who I was back in the day, being a Mia's girl, or am I, more of who I've been the past couple years? Like, because I think being in Riverdale did a good job for her, because I think she herself kind of realized she didn't want to be who she was prior to coming to Riverdale. And it's like, with this whole Chad situation, is Chad trying to turn her back into who she was before? Once again, it's just like, you can see the parallels a little bit between this and like, Hermione and Hiram's relationship to a certain extent. I think it's just like, I think we're getting at a more personal view of their relationship, because we got little bits here and there, but now I feel like we're seeing, because I think they made a better job of like hiding like the complicatedness of their relationship. Like I said, could be reading too much into it, but I think that's an interesting thing that they've set up in that regard. Another side of things is Betty looking into the Polly situation, because at first she's kind of worried because she hasn't heard from Polly, but her mom makes it seem like that's what Polly does. But when she hears from Tony that, like, obviously Polly was seen kind of in this sketchy truck stop, and it's like both selling Jingle Jangle while also potentially, hooking up, it's like Betty gets worried, so her and Kevin work together to, which I think is so interesting that Kevin's just kind of like, well, Betty is like his bestie, so it's like, if you need any help, I'm here to help you, especially because this is concerning your sister. But I would think with all the teaching and stuff like that, he'd be super reluctant to kind of go down that route. But still going to help out Betty whatever way he can. So they end up setting up the whole situation with her being with the driver and everything. It's like, she's actually not actually a full-blown FBI agent. I think she's still classified as still in training and stuff like that. So, but I guess it's like, you have somewhat the credentials that kind of fake it. But I was like, you would think I think eventually that's going to turn into something where they're like, whoa, you can't be using FBI resources when you're not really a full-blown FBI agent, So I think that'll probably come up as a storyline element. I could be mistaken. I don't think she actually is a full-blown FBI agent. So we'll see whether that ends up being an issue. But obviously, what was interesting was the truck driver being like, yeah, like, everything seemed fine and dandy until like partway down the road. It's like, oh, Polly got out and she started freaking out. Like, maybe she saw something. Maybe she kind of got high and freaked out. We don't know. But it's like, he was like, oh, she was freaked out. I didn't want to make things worse. Like, what was I supposed to do? It's like, you left her on the side of the road, dude. And now we as the audience know, like, she got mixed up in the wrong thing. Now, like I said, I don't know what it is that made her get out the truck and made her freaked out and scared. Like, is there something he's not telling them? It seemed like he was trying to be as honest as possible, but who knows? So what was it she saw that freaked her out or worried her? Like, maybe she knew of like some of the disappearances recently or something like that no one else really knows about, but because she's kind of in that world she knows about, maybe she started getting worried that maybe something like that was about to happen or go down. Like I said, it may have just been like, maybe she just was high and like lost it a little. I don't know. But Alice and Betty ended up finding some of her stuff on the side of the road, so now they're worried, And so at the end of near the end of the episode, they're looking through, they're tracking her phone, and they end up finding, Kevin, at least from the last time we see, finds her stuff in a swamp area, which I'm like, that's not good, because a swamp area is a type of area where you make bodies disappear. So hopefully it's not that. It might be just a situation of like, that's the best place to dump her stuff, but hopefully it's nothing dark. We'll have to wait and see kind of how that plays out. Like I said, I doubt it. There's going to be probably parallels to it, but I don't think this has anything with the deal with Betty's situation with TBK. We'll find out, but I don't. But I don't think it does. I think it's just going to correlate a little bit. But what was also interesting on the Betty front is we are continuing to see the developments between her and Archie. And it's a very, casual thing of like, this is nice. But I think it's going to turn into something more. Granted, it's going to be complicated because obviously they're keeping it a secret. It's like, oh, we're adults and everything. But it's like, yeah, even it's kind of, it'd be awkward, especially because you're trying to build the group back up for, both Veronica and Jughead to find out, oh, you two are together. That was an issue that was already an issue beforehand. And for that to rekindle all these years later, it's still going to be probably a thing of like, no, we're adults. That was years ago, but it's still going to probably make everyone feel a certain way. But also, it's like Betty and Archie, like, that's always been a thing of like, you always kind of felt like it was going to go that direction, just because like, obviously Betty kind of made it clear early on how she felt about Archie, but things never worked out like that, sadly. But so those flames kind of got rekindled 7 years ago, and now they're kind of rekindling after all these years, because like both of them are currently single. So it's like, oh, like where we were before, we were both in relationships, so what we were doing is kind of bad, but now we're single, like we can have fun. I think it's going to turn into more because what was already there. They've known each other since they were kids, so it's like, and they've been in love with each other since they were kids, so a lot of that's kind of getting rekindled on that front. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see what kind of happens as things kind of develop on that front. But another angle to this whole situation is, Reggie and his players from Stonewall Prep end up starting a fire in the school, which I love that Archie was like, they're like, how did you find out? He's like, I was on my night run and I heard the alarm. It's like, yeah, I can't admit that you and Betty were shacking up inside of a car at the time, and that's how you knew. And I don't want to draw that much attention, so it's like, it's not that important of a detail. Which actually it's actually interesting because it's like, well, hooking up at the school and everything like that. It's like, all right, let's not forget Archie hooked up with one of his teachers. God, I almost like that. That just popped in my mind. I was like, all right. That was a thing, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, to be fair, that was like forever ago. That was season 1. Because the last time she popped up in story was season 2 when the Black Hood, Betty's dad, ended up killing her. Regardless, tangents and all that. God, I'm lost my train of thought. Right. But Archie confronting Reggie and it's like, oh, you're not even denying it, and straight up punched him in the face. It's like, yo. I mean, to be fair, Archie could get a little hot-headed, and I feel like that probably hasn't settled down, even with, like, military discipline. I think, in certain regards, it's probably, like, amplified, because for him, it's probably, in his mind, it's like, yeah, for one, it's like, that used to be your home, like, Riverdale High, like, this was your school, too, and it's like, now you're full-blown team, hiring full-blown Stone Prep. It's like, nah, bump that, I think, it's a situation of, like, how could you do that? Like, we used to be bros, we used to be tight, but he also knows, like, oh, Reggie kind of chose his side. It's like, hey, you could have helped me out when it came to the God, what's her face is, like, staying in my place, but you didn't. You showed your true colors, so I think that's probably an element to it. But I think maybe because of his own military experience for Archie, it was a situation of, like, this is kind of like where my group, my team resides, and you dare attack our home base. Like, I think it's kind of like, that's at least how I'm internalizing it. I'm probably reading too much into it. Like, whether Archie necessarily draws those same parallels, But Archie wants to kind of get back at him because they can't necessarily do anything to him because it's like, well, they're kind of the pride. Like, they're all the pride of hope that Riverdale has. Like, it's Stone Prep's football team. Like, they're the only kind of joy that they have in town. So Archie's like, to counter that, it's like, well, why don't we bring back the Bulldogs, But they need the funding. He tries to, he first rounds up team people from all these different classes. But then, he doesn't have the funding because Tony won't give him the money. So she's like, we don't really have the money. We have some set aside for other stuff, which interestingly enough turns out to be the Vixens. But he was like, but there's not even a team to cheer for. She's like, nah, but we got. I guess it's a little. I think it kind of rubs at least Archie the wrong way because it's like, oh really? Because it's like you have funding for like the cheer squad. Like, not even some of that can, like, we couldn't like split it or something. Like, some goes to the cheer squad, some goes to the football team. But it's also, I mean, I guess because it's also supposed to show her bias. It's like, yeah, but I've been here the entire time as a counselor, and so, like, I already set aside some of the budget for this, like, way before the Bulldog thing. So this was already in motion, so it can't be stopped, type of thing. It kind of goes like, yeah, that's a little dickish. Interesting. Well, on many different fronts, because obviously Archie goes to Cheryl for money, but obviously Cheryl doesn't have the money, like. Giving the money to Tony, which even, in retrospect, it is kind of a low blow of using their relationship as a means of getting money. It worked out, sure, but it's like it bled her resources dry. So, like, the people working on Thornhill, it's like, they're like, oh, we need money. She's like, don't worry, they'll get the money soon enough, So, because for her, it's like all the noise of the construction is the only thing that quiets her soul, So, once again, she's trying to keep the curse at bay, keep her own, I think, thoughts at bay of just kind of like, it probably helps her kind of fight back a lot of her demons. But Archie was like, yeah, I thought, because your brother was a Bulldog. She's like, of course, how dare you come here and use JJ as like a means of getting money? Get out. It's like, okay. Even that was kind of a low blow in Archie's case as well. But, I mean, it's also because Cheryl legitimately doesn't have the money. Like, I think she's trying to put up a front like everything's okay, but obviously it's not. Especially because they're doing that whole forgery thing. Which I was wondering if her Nana Rose was the one that kind of set that up, but maybe her Nana Rose gave her the idea, but it was more so like or it could have been her idea for all we know. But it seems like, at first I was wondering if she was being forced into it, but it seems she's a lot more complicit than I felt. I think at the time she was crying about the Tony thing just because I think it was just kind of like, it tugged at her heartstrings, and the relationship she had to give up, which I think it's interesting, this whole situation, because I literally did a video last Sunday, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday beforehand on Valentine's Day, where I included Tony and Cheryl. At the time, I was like, yeah, they're going through something right now, but it's like, oh, it's just how interesting, like how quickly that turned around like that. But regardless, it was just going on a bit of a tangent. But yeah, kind of went right. But the other thing I wanted to focus on because I thought was really interesting was Cheryl, obviously setting up the whole forgery deal that she's got going on. Obviously, the whole point is not to let them know, hey, this is the real thing, show it to the buyer, then swap it out for her really good fake. And it's like, oh, they never know the difference. It's like, that's probably going to turn sideways because you have certain experts, they probably hire people to look into that type of stuff, but whether or not they go the extra mile, we'll kind of have to see. Because I get the feeling like that whole angle isn't going to work out for them. That's probably going to come back and blow up in their faces. Just that type of stuff, you just never get away with it for long. And then I get the feeling like it's just Cheryl's just had a lot of setbacks in her life, and I just get the feeling like this is going to be another one. But what I also think is the whole interesting situation, too, is the Mrs. Bell situation. Because it's like, oh, you wanted me to call you if there was something important going down at Riverdale. And she did it twice. And it made me think of me. It made me go, oh, Snooper's going to snoop, huh? It made me immediately think of that. Because I was like, look at you ratting to not only Cheryl, but Hiram as well. Cheryl on the front of because she's like, she didn't appreciate the fact is that Tony brought back the Vixens because it's like, oh, those are hers. Like, she started the Vixens. That's something she took pride in. So for to know Tony's resuscitating them without her, it's like, no, like, I get it. You my boo and everything, but it's like, no, you don't do that. The Vixens are mine. But it was also interesting, like, because she was like, be careful, kind of what you're doing, Miss Topaz. And there was this almost smile across Tony's face, which I was like, did Tony do that on purpose because she knew Cheryl would hear about it? Like, she trying to, like, spark something inside of Cheryl. I was like, was that what the whole point of this was? Is this, like, some grand gesture of, like, you wanted to bring the Vixens back, but also you wanted to bring Cheryl back to, like, life and just get her out of Thornhill? It's like, oh, you're actually here. Like, because the only reason why she left initially was, like, for Pops, but then she also showed up for, like, the meeting about Riverdale's future and obviously being the supporter for Riverdale High. But I'm like, I'm wondering if that's what Tony's plan, but like I said, that smile across her face made me feel like it was. Like, she orchestrated this to breathe life back into Cheryl, kind of get that fire burning again. We'll see whether or not I'm right on that front, but that's where I immediately thought. But with Veronica's help, Archie was able to get, like, the team together, which obviously for Hiram, that's not a good thing. None of this is good. The school reopening, there being at least 100 students enrolled, because for him it's like, even if, Riverdale is kind of no more, this could be the spark that everyone rallies around, because he's like, yeah, for whatever reason, people have pride and connection to that school. I mean, to be fair, he didn't go to the school, so he doesn't have the same connection to it like everyone else does, So everyone else has a little bit, all the other parents had more pride when it came to Riverdale High because they all went there except for him. So that's kind of the circumstances they've created. So I think it's a little more understanding why him out of anyone's willing to destroy it, because he doesn't, like I said, he doesn't have the Riverdale pride that everyone else does, But he's really mad now, so, especially with Archie making this move. So he sets fire to Archie's house, which is like, don't you think that's a little extreme? But it's like, I'm sure that was payback on his front as well as Reggie's front of, like, I need to send a message. So it wasn't just a little fire either. It's like, oh, it's in the front door and the back door. It's like, wow, that seems a little extreme. But it's like, yeah, I'd pull back on that a little bit because you've come blow to blows with Archie beforehand. We don't know how much Archie's changed in the 7 years. He might not be as reserved as you think he might be. Well, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, Archie might be like, oh, armed with some armed with the tactics that he's learned. Like, you never know what he's capable of and how this will turn out. But it's gonna be interesting to see where ultimately all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.